ICS Faculty Fellowship Public Talk, engaging with community perspectives on gun violence in Toledo, Ohio. Can you hear me well? This talk is presented by Docherty, an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at Bowling Green State University, a dedicated community researcher and advocate, and a Spring 2025 ICS Faculty Fellow. My name is Valeria Grimberg-Pla, Profesora de Español and Director of the Institute for the Study of Culture and Society at BGSU. ICS mission is to engage the BGSU campus and surrounding communities in conversations that address significant issues shaping our society. Our faculty fellowship program is a core part of this mission, featuring speakers like Megan, whose research and projects aim to address issues that affect our lives and suggest possible strategies for a better life for all. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that Bowling Green State University and its campuses are located in the Great Black Swamp and the Lower Great Lakes region, the homeland of the Wyandot, Kickapoo, Miami, Potawatomi, Ottawa, and multiple other indigenous tribal nations present and past, who were forcibly removed to and from this area. Recognizing these ties reminds us of the ongoing process of decolonizing our understanding of history. We are grateful to indigenous communities who have been living and working on this land from time immemorial, and we acknowledge that our work here is informed by their past and present resilience. It is not a coincidence that we are hosting this event in Toledo, a city and county committed to fostering an inclusive and safe environment through the Welcome Toledo-Lucas County initiative. I would also like to take a moment to recognize the often invisible labor of those who prepared and will maintain this space after we leave. We are especially grateful to the Toledo-Lucas County Public Library for hosting tonight's event. It is powerful and fitting to be gathered here in a civic space committed to public learning, justice, and community connection. We'd also like to thank the ICS Administrative Assistant, Amy Smith, and all ICS graduate assistants, especially Sean McDonald's here, and our interns for their work in organizing this event. ICS work would not be possible without their contributions. Tonight, we are honored to welcome Megan, whose community-engaged research lies at the intersection of public policy, neighborhood safety, mental health, and justice. As part of her project in collaboration with the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, Megan has been having powerful conversations with survivors and advocates, family members, youth educators, religious leaders, and local organizations about the lived realities of gun violence in their neighborhoods. We are grateful for Megan's commitment and for the time, stories, and trust shared by so many in the community. Her work not only supports current gun violence prevention efforts, but aims to build a long-term collaborative framework that empowers residents as researchers, advocates, and change makers. Before we begin, just a few reminders. If you're curious about what ICS does and what ICS is about, you are welcome to take our brochures. We have brochures about the Institute as a whole and also about the Big Ideas podcast. That's a podcast that we produce at ICS featuring speakers that talk about meaningful topics for our communities and show the value of research for the public good. We just finished airing season 11, and we are going to feature Megan in our next season based on her current research. So it's BG, Big Ideas. There is also a fact sheet about the podcast, and if you're interested in receiving our mail list, you can also sign up there. Following Megan's presentation, we will open the floor for a Q&A session, and we welcome your voice in that conversation. We are truly welcome also for your feedback, so there are QR codes on the seats and at the end of the presentation, so we would appreciate any suggestions you have for us about this event or future programming. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming.
Hi everyone, I want to echo the thanks for being here tonight. I know it's not easy to come here at the end of what was probably a long day. I know I had to get like a lot of coffee in me to get here, so I really do appreciate everyone taking the time and showing up today. And I really appreciate ICS for the fellowship and this opportunity, and so I want to acknowledge that. For those of you who have been going to these meetings that I'm going to talk about, because there are some familiar faces in the audience, you'll recognize that with this topic, it's common for the person leading the meeting to take a moment of silence to honor the people who have lost their lives to gun violence and the survivors and families and communities left behind. And so I would like to take the opportunity to do that now and just take a moment of silence before beginning the presentation. Thank you, I appreciate that. So I do have an agenda for today. I'll provide a little bit of background about me, not because I like talking about myself, but I think it helps provide some context for the project and why I proposed it. I'll talk about what I initially proposed versus like what actually kind of ended up happening, the process, and some key findings and next steps. The slides do look a little distorted on my end. I think they look here good. Here, okay. I am from New Jersey originally, so I got my PhD at Rutgers University Newark in developmental psychology. So I'm not a practicing psychologist, I'm not a clinical psychologist, but my focus is on research and teaching. Specifically in grad school, I focused on the development of aggressive behaviors and attitudes in childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood. And I specifically focused on callous and unemotional traits, so youth who seem to lack empathy, emotion, guilt, concern was the main focus of mine. When I did my postdoc at Arizona State University, so if you're not familiar, it's just a couple extra years to get some more experience doing research before you move into another position, like a tenure track position that I'm currently in. That one was funded by a federal grant to study predictors of gun violence and in adolescence and early adulthood, so I specifically spent that time doing work dedicated to gun violence. I then joined the faculty at BGSU Psychology in 2019, and I've lived in Toledo since. My husband and I moved in Toledo at that time. I'm also affiliated with the University of Michigan's Research Center for Group Dynamics and the Institute for Social Research, so some of the work that I do is actually through University of Michigan up in Ann Arbor. I also volunteer with Moms Demand Action. I'm very happy to see some moms in the audience, the Community Action Table, I know we have some folks here, and the Violence Reduction Council, and I'll talk about those in a little bit more detail when I get into the process. All right, so just providing some context, I have a feeling that a lot of you in the audience are probably already familiar, but I wasn't sure exactly who would be in the audience, so I wanted to be able to provide this context and this information to sort of share with you what we're dealing with locally here in Toledo and how that compares to national trends. I have some Toledo sites or landmarks up here, some ones that I particularly appreciate. So Fifth Third's Field, the UT campus, even though I'm from BG, you know, UT has a beautiful campus, have to acknowledge it, Old West End, the mural. And I have those up here because today's topic is a difficult one, right? It's not an easy one to talk about. Toledo is certainly not alone in dealing with the levels of gun violence that we're seeing. But I don't want this to sound like a talk about how bad Toledo is, how violent Toledo is, right? Toledo is a vibrant city with a lot of strengths, a lot of resources, and so I wanted to put those up there as a reminder of how strong and beautiful our city is and the things that we have to be thankful for in our city. We are a mid-sized city, so around 265,000 live in Toledo. We have around 2,000 shootings per year. Around 200 people are shot every year in Toledo. We've had around 40 to 70 homicides per year in the past 5 years, and we'll show some trends versus national trends in the next slide. And we have around a 14 per 100,000 homicide rate, 10 per 100,000 for firearm homicides specifically, and those are almost double the national averages. So I do want to take a moment here and just note that gun violence is a public health crisis in the US more broadly, right? So again, it's not just Toledo. We are facing this on a national level, and this is really unique to the US. Compared to our peer countries, we have a much higher rate of gun ownership, and we have a much higher rate of injury and mortality due to firearms. So if you compare to other countries, let's say in Europe, we outpace them by far in terms of injury and mortality due to firearms. That being said, I do want to note that this one is kind of cut off. This is supposed to say for every firearm homicide, so every person who's killed by firearms, on average there are 2 people who are shot and injured but survive. So when I show numbers reflecting homicides, just think about the larger picture and how that's not really encompassing all of the injury and harm due to firearms. I do also want to acknowledge that most gun-related deaths are due to suicide, so about 60%. But for this project, for this talk, I am focusing in on homicide just because that was the nature of the project. And a lot of times I think if you are like me and you are maybe privileged to not personally have experiences with gun violence or to not be personally affected or have lost someone to gun violence, I think the media disproportionately spends time on things like school shootings and mass shootings, which are of course tragedies and of course things that we should do everything in our power to prevent. But really those make up a very small number of firearm-related mortalities in any given year. So most are due to suicide, and then after that would be homicide. And when we talk about things like unintentional shootings, police-involved shootings, or mass shootings, we're talking about like 3% or fewer of gun-related deaths. So again, a very small number, still tragic, still something that we need to focus on preventing, but for this talk, I'm really, again, honing in on community violence, homicide, and injury. Here I have a couple of crime maps. These are from the Toledo Police Department website, so anyone can go in on the website and you can look at these maps. They even have the data tables underneath them, so you can see the specific crimes that occurred at specific addresses. So on the left, those are homicides in Toledo from 2020 to 2025. So each one of those data points represent a human life that was lost. And I really want to make sure that I emphasize that throughout this presentation, right? I'm presenting data, I'm presenting numbers, I'm presenting points on a map, but at the end of the day, these are human lives that are lost, these are tragedies, these are families and communities that have been affected by gun violence. And so I do wanna make sure to note that. And then here on the right, these are crimes. These are specifically not including homicide. These are things like burglary, robbery, assault. And you can see in the numbers, the size of the circle and the number in the circle sort of corresponds to how many crimes were committed in a given neighborhood. I was a little unclear on what years this reflected. It seemed like maybe 2024 to 2025 primarily. And I show these just to show that you can see the concentrations of crime and homicide in particular neighborhoods in Toledo. So yes, this is a Toledo issue, but not each neighborhood is going to be affected equally, right? And so what I'm focusing on today are those neighborhoods and those populations who are at greater risk of experiencing gun violence. In terms of trends, we've seen both nationally and here locally that gun violence rates peaked during the pandemic in 2020 and 2021 for a host of reasons. So on the top, those are national rates of firearm suicides on the top, firearm homicides on the bottom, and you can see we've been in a decline since the peak of the pandemic. Similarly, for firearm homicides in Toledo, we've also been on the decline since the peak that we saw in the pandemic. But again, risk of firearm-related injury is not equally distributed. It is really pretty starkly divided along lines of age, race, and sex. So males are overwhelmingly more likely to be injured and killed due to firearms compared to females. So for example, in our homicides, the 37 in 2024 in Toledo, 84% of the victims were males. And so in this graph, these are all victims represented, but just know that most of these were males. And you can see that young Black men in particular, between the ages of roughly 14 to 34, are at particular risk for firearm homicide. This is not specific to Toledo. This is also something we're seeing on a national level. But again, just something that I want to highlight here. So in Toledo, Black people are 9 times more likely to die by firearm homicide than white people. And nationally, firearm-related death accounts for 1 in 2 deaths among Black males ages 15 to 24, half of all deaths in that age range. That's compared to, I think it's 1 in 11 for white females in the same age range, and 1 in 5 for white non-Hispanic males or Black females. So pretty stark difference in rates. We did see some firearm homicide reduction, again from 2022 to 2023. So on a national level, we saw about a 9% reduction in homicides, and that rate of around 7 to 9% held for a lot of cities. But uniquely, Toledo actually saw a decrease of about 30 to 46%. According to Toledo police data, it was 34%. According to another data source, it was 46%. So whichever number you're going with, we way outpaced the decrease in rates of firearm homicide compared to other cities. And so here we have some similar sized cities in the Midwest. And so we can see even with the optimistic number or the more conservative number, we still outpaced other cities in terms of decreasing our firearm homicide rate. All right, so hopefully that helped to paint a little bit more of the broader picture. And then I wanted to provide a little bit of a timeline in terms of initiatives in Toledo focused on gun violence. This is not exhaustive, right? Not everything that the city has done is up here, but just to give some background for some of the things that I'm going to talk about. So in 2020, the mayor began an initiative to prevent gun violence, and gun violence was declared a public health crisis, right? So we could start to devote more resources to preventing gun violence. In 2021, they began a Save Our Community program initiation. So Save Our Community is our violence interruption program in Toledo. We have street teams that are dedicated to mediating conflicts, right? Interrupting that cycle of violence before it occurs, promoting sort of like positive social norms in the community, things like that. And so it started in 2021, and then in 2022, it expanded into LaGrange Corridor. In 2023, the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement, I'm gonna call them MONSE throughout the talk, just because the other is a little bit of a mouthful, but MONSE began in 2023. I've been working closely with Malcolm Cunningham, the director of MONSE, and the Community Action Table began convening. So the Community Action Table is a group of community members and stakeholders in Toledo. We meet monthly, and we've worked on a 5-year comprehensive plan to prevent gun violence in Toledo called Peace of Motion. It was first published last year, 2024. We just presented it, Malcolm and Josh Davies just presented it to City Council, I think it was last week. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. Also in 2023, we expanded, or the city expanded Save Our Community into 4 high schools in Toledo, and so we now have both a street team and a school-based team. In 2024, the city also conducted a cost of gun violence study, and according to that study, specifically in Toledo, they used data from all different sources, hospitals, law enforcement, a number of different sources. They determined that on average, each fatal shooting costs taxpayers about $883,000, compared to each non-fatal shooting about $572,000. Also in 2024, the Violence Reduction Council was initiated. So this is a group of people who meet quarterly to review specific homicide cases that have occurred in the city to figure out, you know, what could have gone differently, right? What was maybe the underlying factor or set of factors for that particular case, and how can we address cases like this moving forward? And then also this year, the City of Toledo was awarded a Bureau of Justice Assistance grant for community violence intervention and prevention, and so I'll talk a little bit more about that. So I've been lucky enough to be a consultant on that grant as well, but that just started in January of this year. Okay, so when I initially proposed my project to ICS, I really wanted to get into some really deep conversations with people in the community, and ideally come up with an action research plan that came from community members that really exemplified the kind of research that they wanted to see in the community. Unfortunately, I faced a lot of different barriers to that, so what I'm going to talk about today is still sharing community members' perspectives, but it's maybe not like the type of in-depth conversations that I really wanted to have, and I wasn't able to develop that action research plan. I think going forward, I have to think about how to communicate the benefits of that to the community, right? If I come to you and say, help me develop a research plan, that makes it sound like I just want you to help like write a grant for, like that makes it sound like I'm putting all the work on you and you're not necessarily gonna see any benefit from that. And so I think if I can help communicate any potential benefits to the community and sort of develop that more mutually beneficial relationship, I will focus on that going forward. And the reason I applied to ICS for this is because I was trained as a quantitative psychologist, sort of using survey methods. So on a rate of, on a scale of 1 to 5, strongly agree versus strongly disagree, I'm gonna take the average across all those responses, and then I'm gonna show bar charts and things like that, like I just showed. For this project though, I really wanted to go more in-depth and kind of have more of a qualitative sense of what was going on in the community, and because I wasn't specifically trained for that, it helped to have this fellowship, to have the time and resources dedicated to be able to do that. And finally, all mistakes are my own. I am sure there are mistakes. Please don't blame anyone else, any of the people or organizations that I'm going to talk about. They are truly just my own. All right, so if I didn't do what I maybe originally set out to do, what exactly did I do? Mostly I met with the Community Action Table, so again, I worked with them monthly. I was on the Inclusive Workforce Development Committee, or working group, so I worked on that Peace in Motion, that comprehensive violence prevention plan. I met regularly with Moms Demand Action, so I'm our local data team lead, which means I get to do some like nerdy behind the scenes stuff for Moms Demand Action, but I also do things like go to events and table and share information about moms and information about safe gun storage, pass out gun locks, things like that. I met with the Violence Reduction Council quarterly for that homicide case review I talked about. For that Borough of Justice Assistance project, we've been meeting weekly with Monty and some other BGSU faculty. And also reviewed some previously gathered information from the community. So there were already some youth surveys, stakeholder interviews, things like that that had been collected in the past, maybe 3 or 4 years. And so I reviewed some of that, and some of that is going to be represented in what I'm talking about today. I'm not in that picture at the top, but that was the city council meeting where Malcolm and Josh presented Peace in Motion to city council. And at some point I was up behind them providing public comment, basically saying, this is an evidence-based comprehensive prevention plan, and sort of stating why I thought the city should adopt it. So part of my work there. All right, again, this is not an exhaustive list, but if I had to distill everything into some key themes, one was the resilience and resourcefulness of people in Toledo. I'm gonna go into each of these in a little bit more detail too. I'll talk about feelings of safety, the needs of survivors. The importance of youth voice and empowerment was one that really strongly came through. Social networks and interactions, changing local and national trends, and then lack of equity and systemic oppression. So again, not exhaustive. There are other things I could also be talking about, but these seem to pretty clearly and consistently come through. In terms of resourcefulness and resilience, we have a lot of amazing organizations and amazing individuals in Toledo that I actually would not be aware of if I wasn't going to the Community Action Table, if I wasn't working with Monty. But I would go to these meetings and hear the people talking about the incredible work that they're doing, and it is really amazing what some people are able to do. So we do have a lot of resourcefulness, resilience in our city. We have a lot of positives. What seemed to come out was that even though there are amazing people and amazing organizations doing this work, they still could use greater support and infrastructure and organization. So even though this person over here might be doing amazing work and this person over here might be doing amazing work, right? It's all kind of piecemeal and not necessarily as cohesive or tied together as it could be. I know when we were developing Peace in Motion, an umbrella organization was one of the recommendations that was developed. In other words, if all of these individual people or small agencies that maybe don't want to register as a nonprofit or for some reason can't register, right? How can we develop some sort of umbrella organization so that we could kind of organize everyone under one roof, but still give everyone the freedom to do the work that they're doing. And then again, as part of that Bureau of Justice Assistance project, we're going to be doing some resource mapping, providing micro grants, and setting up a capacity building training academy. So hopefully helping with some of this. The city has gone through a number of initiatives in the past few years. Again, that timeline was not exhaustive. And so some people did note, like, there were successful things that maybe got taken away, or there were maybe some not so successful initiatives. And so I think there is a lot of optimism, but there's also some fatigue and some possible, like, yeah, I'll wait and see how this pans out, right? You've got this initiative this year, but I'll wait and see if it's still around next year or the year after that. So there is some sense of that in the community, at least it seemed to me. And then a clear need for those doing the work and those affected to engage in effective self-care. If you are someone who is, interacting regularly with people who have lost someone to gun violence, are dealing with this as an active issue, not only are those people who are experiencing the loss, clearly they are affected, but then the people around them, right? The social workers, community health workers, street team, right? All of those people, this is a job that, again, they're doing amazing work, but the possibility for burnout is very high, and this can be a really traumatizing job for those individuals. And so MONSE does some amazing things to try to help support them in engaging in self-care, but it did seem like that was maybe still a need, that there are things that we can maybe do better in terms of taking care of those people. All right, sorry the slides are a little bit jumbled. Youth voice and empowerment was one that really came through. I didn't talk about this when I was going through firearm violence in Toledo, but one thing that consistently came out is that it's getting younger and younger and younger. So it's not like the 21 and 22-year-olds maybe where it's starting, it's like the 15, 14, 13-year-olds where it's starting. Pretty consistently came out. And in terms of youth, they know that they are deeply affected by this issue, right? They're the ones going to school, or maybe not going to school because they feel unsafe. They're the ones worried about, am I gonna find out that one of my friends died today, or one of my cousins died today, right? They're deeply affected by this issue, and they feel frustrated when they're made to feel helpless or not listened to, right? So this is a problem that deeply affects them, but they feel like the adults that hold all the power, that hold all the responsibility, they're not really bringing us to the table. They're not empowering us. They're not including us in these decisions and these conversations. And so that was something that consistently came out. That being said, there have been some really wonderful efforts to include, empower, engage youth. And so No More Silence is one of those. This is a podcast. I listened to it on Apple Podcasts, but you Google No More Silence, you'll be able to listen to these episodes. It came out of the RAM Empowerment Project, I believe at Rogers High School, and Fearless Writers, which is a sort of like this writing group. And from what I gathered, youth were not told to focus on gun violence. As part of the writing exercise, it came up that this was clearly an issue for youth that they wanted to address. And so they came up with this podcast where they invite community members, experts, school administrators and educators, right, to come on and talk about gun violence. And they also created t-shirts to raise money for the Healing and Compassion Fund for victims and survivors of gun violence. And I'll talk about that fund a little bit later too. So again, having these opportunities for youth to generate the idea and then be able to follow through on that idea, right? They're learning how to produce a podcast. They're learning how to, do these things because someone is, giving them the chance to do that. Other programs, there was the Paint It Forward Festival, I think was maybe July last year, where they were able to paint a mural in Toledo. There's a number of summer job programs for youth. The Parks and Recreation has a youth advisory board. Again, not an exhaustive list. This list could be like probably pages long, but just wanted to highlight a few of the things that are going on that seem positive. Oh, and Shoot This, Not That. So this was a youth photo voice project through Parks and Youth Services. From what I understand, it's currently at the Toledo Museum of Art. I am ashamed to say I haven't been there yet, but I am gonna make it there. I think it's until the 20th, so it's like a few more days I wanna say that it's there. But yeah, this was, I think they did it with 5 youth last summer. It's at the museum right now, and I think they said they wanted to up it to 10 youth maybe doing it this summer, so I think the plan is to do it again and possibly expand it this year. This is a quote, this is from a Blade article, so this is not a quote that someone shared with me personally, but this was pulled from a Blade article. This was a Rogers High School graduate, Avery Davis, and I believe Bryson Davis, one of the violence interrupters, is Avery's brother. So the quote is, "It allowed me to be seen and heard. A lot of the time, students and young adults are overlooked. It feels amazing to tell our stories and for people to see them and hear them. There's more to life than gun violence." So again, this is someone who was involved in the Photo Voice project and was able to share their experience. Another thing that clearly came out is that we need to reach all youth. It is easy enough, maybe still hard, but easy enough to start a program and say like, okay, I've got a youth program and look at all my A students and look at all my perfect attendance students that have shown up for this program. But we really need to make sure we're reaching those who are not easy to reach, who maybe don't want to be reached, but sort of need to. And so I think this is an issue that has come up time and time again. And again, being creative about how to do that. Maybe youth don't want to do a focus group, maybe they don't want to do an interview, but a photo voice project, a podcast, a mural, right? Allowing them to sort of generate these ideas for how they can empower themselves and engage in this issue. Feelings of safety is also a consistent one that has come up, and this is consistent with other research as well and things that we find on the national level. So this is the Youth Risk Behavior Survey from 2023. They surveyed high school students every couple of years, and they note high rates of students who were threatened or injured with a weapon at school in the past year, and the percent of those that didn't go to school in the past month because they did not feel safe. So again, consistent with that, I heard this come up time and time again during meetings that there are real issues of safety. There are real places, blocks, neighborhoods, what have you, where people, are in danger. They're not necessarily safe, and turning to law enforcement is not always viewed as a safe or realistic option. Once someone is in the lifestyle or the streets or however you might want to phrase it, it's hard for them to leave. So even though they might, feel guilty, might want to change their ways, right? They might turn a corner. There might still be a target on their back, sort of almost literally because of what they've already done, what they've already engaged in. And so people have reported like, yeah, this person has returned to the community, and they sort of know. They sort of know that their time is limited because of what they've done before. And then youth often, again, don't feel safe going to or from school. They often don't feel safe at home either because of violence in the home. And so unfortunately, I wish every kid could say, home is a safe place for me, but that's not the case. And so if home isn't safe, sometimes being on the street can feel safer even with threat of gun violence. This one's such a jumble. Social networks and interactions was another big one that came through. And I know that's kind of vague, but what I'm talking about here is, part of it is like gangs or groups or whatever you want to call them, which in Toledo seems like they're a little bit more maybe fluid, on the smaller side than you may be thinking of compared to bigger cities. But these networks, these groups provide access to guns, motivation to carry, as well as riskier situations, right? If you're going into situations where you know the threat is real, sometimes you're more likely to do that when you're part of a group, when you're going with other people. Oftentimes family members are involved, so they may be victims of gun violence, they may be perpetrators of gun violence, they may be in a gang already, and so it might be sort of through family involvement. But social networks can also be a resource. They're not necessarily always a source of risk, and so to the extent that you have positive peers, role models, mentors, right, who are not engaging in this behavior, particularly if it's someone with a similar background to them, who can say, I've been in your shoes, or I've been pretty close to being in your shoes, and I made it through the other side, and I'm telling you now, this is why you want to stop doing this, right? This is why you want to get out and no longer engage in this behavior. So those kinds of ties can be really important for disengaging. And then shootings are often motivated by social ties or interactions, so a lot of times you're retaliating against maybe someone who harmed you or slighted you, or harmed or slighted someone that you're close to, right? So a lot of it has to do, these are not typically random. These are motivated by social ties and interactions. And in one mapping exercise that they did with youth pointed to neighborhoods or areas, blocks really, where they felt less safe, and they were more likely to point to social aspects. So things like, I saw people getting into an argument on this corner. I saw someone pulling a gun on this block versus something like built environment, right, a vacant home, abandoned lot, something like that. They're more likely to point to those social aspects. Changing local and national trends also play a role. Again, there was a rapid increase in decline during and after COVID. You never really know when the next event might come that might trigger something like that. Changing gun laws nationally and at the state level. In Ohio, we're relatively permissive when it comes to gun laws, and there's been a plethora of research on how greater gun restrictions at the state level are associated with lower rates of firearm mortality. So in the US, we are sort of a patchwork system where states can have their own firearm laws, and those with greater restrictions tend to see lower levels of firearm mortality. There's also a lot of changes happening right now. Federal government, local government, things like access to benefits seem like they might be changing. Research funding seems like it's changing. And just a general uncertainty about what's gonna happen the next week, the next month, the next year, right? There's a lot of things that feel up in the air right now. And so people noted, again, that there's this sense of like, what do we do? Do I fully commit if we're not really sure that the support is going to be there? And then changes due to social media and technology. So I didn't talk about this on the youth slide, but social media is also a huge one, right? A lot of these conflicts either start on social media, sort of bounce back and forth between online and in real life. And I think there's just a lot we still don't know when it comes to social media and technology and how those are maybe impacting rates of violence or how violence is enacted in the community. And then finally, oppression, inequity, and racism. So this is that crime map I showed before. This is, I wanna say it's from 1938, 1940. If you're familiar with the practice of redlining, this is a map in Toledo that kind of shows where purposefully we sort of enacted residential segregation and concentrated disadvantage, particularly in neighborhoods with high rates of Black or African American individuals. And so you can see that this is not necessarily something that happens by accident, right? Part of this is due to these institutionalized practices of racism. Again, young Black men disproportionately more likely to suffer the effects of gun violence. Gun violence is concentrated in neighborhoods with more risk and disadvantage. And what I'm saying is that racism and oppression directly cause gun violence, but they also indirectly cause gun violence because they have such far-reaching consequences across the board, right? So if it impacts your employment, your access to health care, your income, your education, right? All of those things are also indirect causes of gun violence. And I've really been amazed to see Monsi sort of intentionally try to empower those most affected by gun violence and try to provide opportunities and improve equity whenever possible. So I've really been impressed by their efforts. Okay, so in terms of addressing the needs of survivors and victims, it became clear in our community action table meetings that survivors of gun violence had unmet needs. So for example, there are some financial costs associated with firearm homicide that might not be covered or might not be covered quick enough. For example, if there's damage, if there's cleanup required, right? There's certain things that might be needed if a shooting happens inside someone's home or right outside someone's home in a car. And sometimes people can't take time off of work or just are not able to access available resources. And so based on those needs and input of survivors, Monsi initiated the Healing and Compassion Fund to get much needed funds to victims and survivors of gun violence through an application process. I'll have QR codes for people to donate to that if they wish at the end of the talk. I don't believe they've released any funds yet, but they're sort of, I think next month, they're hoping to get that started. And then Moms Demand Action, we had, as far as I know, it was our first self-care event for survivors at a spa. So I was not personally there because, you know, I'm not part of that group. But as far as I know, based on input from the people who went, it felt good to have that self-care day, right? One day is clearly not enough, but, you know, maybe potentially better than nothing. And I think the goal is for us to potentially continue doing that. We also had a bowl over gun violence event for survivors and their families. I think that was in July last year, yeah. And I was at that one, and that one seemed like a good success. We had a lot of people come to the bowling alley and get to engage in some fun activities. Again, it's not enough and I'll talk about some other things in a little bit. These are some resources or organizations that have come up in the meetings that I've been in that people seem to rely on as really good resources for those who need them. So Good Grief of Northwest Ohio, they provide free peer support groups, so it's not like clinicians or counselors, but it is trained facilitators for children and their caregivers, as well as young adults ages 19 to 24 who are dealing with grief and loss. Sisters for Unity is a Toledo-based group of mothers who have lost children to gun violence, so they're active in the community. Last year, I know they had a march to prevent gun violence. I'm assuming the plan is to also do that again this year. Yeah. And then Northwest Ohio, Parents of Murdered Children. I got this info off the web. I don't 100% know if it's accurate, but online it said they meet the second Saturday of every month at the Collingwood Arts Center, so I put that up here in case people want to verify if that's a resource that people want to use. And then the Sophia Center, I just became aware of this one, but there's a breakthrough parent curriculum, Navigating Trauma Across Generations. It's in the Sophia Center in Sylvania. It's a 10-week course. Might not be accessible for everybody, but again, I thought I'd put that up there in case it was of use to anyone. All right, I'll try to get through the rest of this relatively quickly so we can have some time for Q&A and discussion. But in the meetings, what came up in terms of what people saw as reasons for gun violence in Toledo, in the meetings and in the previously collected data that I poured through. Socioeconomic conditions, so things like lack of quality jobs, lack of quality housing, right, lower income on average, maybe more blight, again, abandoned lots, abandoned homes, things like that. A lack of police presence, easy access to guns. Some people said it's a lack of responsible parenting, the parents aren't paying enough attention. Some said it's lax punishments for offenders, so these juveniles come to the attention of the court for maybe some more minor offenses and they kind of get a slap on the wrist, or maybe not as severe a punishment as people think might be warranted. And I do want to note, none of these are really unanimous, right? Like everyone's going to differ in terms of their opinion on what causes gun violence, and if we could just point to one cause, that would be amazing, but that's not the case. Some of them were more close to unanimous than others, so for example, easy access to guns came up a lot. That was one that people frequently cited as like, yeah, if the easier we make it for people to access guns, the more we're gonna see this problem. Some people also said problems with anger, lack of respect, little value for human life, and then media violence, so violence in TV, movies, video games. And a lot of this really kind of maps onto what we see, again, at more national levels too. So people cite lack of economic opportunities, family instability, media violence, access of ease to both legal and illegal guns. All right, so what can be done to prevent future gun violence? Working together in true collaboration across different groups. Again, there's great work being done, but to the extent that it stays like siloed and piecemeal, I don't think it's gonna be enough, and it seemed like people were saying it's not necessarily going to be enough. So to the extent that we can really truly collaborate across these different groups. Reducing blight, increasing light and green space, people commonly noted. Increased access to services and supports, particularly mental health and behavioral health care, and youth programming and mentoring. And not just that those exist, but like helping people access them. So whether that's providing transportation, remote options or telehealth options, having different hours so that if people work different schedules, they can make it, right? Really trying to make that accessible to the people who truly need it and connecting it to the people who truly need it. Increasing jobs, housing, education, and income. Again, reducing easy access to guns and ammunition came up pretty consistently. Maybe finding some way to monitor social media. I think this one was a little bit more nebulous, but people were generally of the idea that something needs to be done about social media. They weren't entirely sure like what we need to do, but something maybe in terms of monitoring conflicts on social media and how they might spill over into the community. And finally, a hospital-based violence prevention program. I know Malcolm has floated the idea and the want to do this for a little while. I don't know if that is still the goal, but this is just showing the cost effectiveness of hospital-based violence prevention programs. So this is sort of similar to the street team that I mentioned, but this is when someone comes to, let's say, the emergency department with a firearm wound, a gunshot wound, that people will be there, a team will be there to sort of provide wraparound supports, stay connected to that after they leave the hospital to hopefully prevent future incidences of violence. And they found that these have been relatively effective in other areas. All right, future directions for research. I really think better academic community partnerships that are mutually beneficial are incredibly important. So it needs to be, if I'm an academic, a researcher coming into a community, it can't just be, what can you all do for me? Take my survey, right? Here's the things that I want from you. It has to be mutually beneficial. And so I've been thinking through what are the ways that I can, provide supports to the community, try and do what I can to maybe amplify the voices of others. Again, I'm not a clinician, but talk to some people in my department and our counseling center and see if maybe we can come up with some ways to get into the community and do some good there. This was a specific research idea that came up in a couple of different meetings I was in. People were saying, well, why don't we go into detention centers, jails, prisons, and talk to people who have been convicted of gun-related crimes and just kind of ask them to walk us through, what were you thinking, what was going on, what might have prevented this, what do you think caused this? So that didn't come from me, but that came from a few different folks at a couple of different meetings. And then youth interviews and focus groups I think are important, but again, we also need some more like innovative or non-traditional approaches, especially to reach those high-risk youth. We need better data within and across systems, and again, this is national too. Nationally, we just do not have good data when it comes to firearm violence in general. But people noted we could have, we might have good data, but it could be better in terms of police data, hospital data, the coroner's office, and then like working across those systems to coordinate and make sure the data are cohesive. And then difficulty of quantifying all aspects of the ecosystem, the sources of support. So when we do this kind of research, as researchers, we tend to gravitate towards the easily measured and kind of like objective metrics. How many people were killed? How many people were injured? How much in dollars did it cost? When that doesn't characterize everything that's going on, right? When a mom says, my son has been missing for more than a month and the violence interrupters came with me to court and supported me even when my son was missing, when they were connected with him, they're connected with our family, providing that support. How do you quantify that and sort of, put that in a bar chart? And so trying to figure out ways of communicating the full spectrum of support and resources in the ecosystem that exists. All right, these are next steps for me. I do have next steps for you all on the following slide, but next steps for me, I was doing this work before the fellowship this semester, so I've been working with the Community Action Table, I think late 2023. Moms I've been doing for about a year. I'm gonna keep doing that stuff. That is not ending. I'm gonna keep going with the Violence Reduction Council, whatever Malcolm and Monsi might need from me, keep working with moms. We're going to keep working on the Bureau of Justice Assistance project, so that one just started up, so we'll keep working on that. We're going to do mapping, network building, microgrants, and setting up that training academy. Engaging youth in research initiatives and solutions. So again, I really want to try and get to youth on their level and communicate to them the importance of like, hey, this research is going to be done. Why don't we try and make sure it's research that you think should be done versus like us as the scientists coming from outside and saying, this is what we think we need to do. It would be great if we could hear your voice in terms of what you think needs to be done. Monitoring trends in the changing landscape, and then increasing awareness of social media and technology and their impact on community violence, and then widening the scope to include suicide. So I am also very interested in doing suicide research. I've met with the Lucas County Suicide Prevention Coalition a couple of times, and I want to start getting more involved with them as well. I just have this chart up here to show how gun suicides are severely under-researched relative to how many deaths they're responsible for each year. And so we desperately need more research on gun suicide, and guns are far and away the most lethal form of suicide. And I believe most suicides are firearm. And I think there's often this misconception that suicide is a problem for like white rural youth and homicide is a problem for Black urban youth, right? Some people kind of see this clear divide, when really this is a problem for Black youth too. So rates of suicide among Black youth have risen faster than in any other racial ethnic group in the past 2 decades, with suicide rates in Black males 10 to 19 years old increasing by 60%. And early adolescent Black youth are twice as likely to die by suicide compared to their white counterparts. So again, this is not just affecting one particular group. This is something that affects quite a lot of youth in our country. All right, so what can you do? You can vote and campaign for candidates who support gun sense laws. And if you're not sure about that, I have a couple of links here. So one is Gun Sense Voter to help you find those candidates. But if you really want to get nerdy with it, I love the RAND page for showing you each like gun-related policy and then the level of evidence that we have that it works to prevent different types of crime and injury. So that's there. We can support research, practice, and policy dedicated to gun violence prevention. I think sometimes there's this idea that, well, why would we spend money on gun violence research when that money could just be funneled into the prevention efforts, into the intervention efforts, right? Let's get it into the community, let's get it to do the work. And we certainly want to do that, but if we don't have the research to back up what we're doing in the community, we could just be throwing money away, sort of doing things that are not necessarily effective. And so we do need the research there to be able to make sure what we're doing is supported, right? Health research has done a lot for things like preventing cancer, treating cancer, right? Gun violence is something similar. We need to be able to have the research to back up what the most effective methods of prevention are. You can volunteer with groups like Moms Demand Action, Students Demand Action, Big Brothers Big Sisters, or the Boys and Girls Club. You can donate to the Healing and Compassion Fund to support victims and survivors. So this is that fund that I mentioned. This QR code should take you there. There's a link, and I think I also have it on the last slide as well. And just to show, again, the importance of gun sense laws over here, this is according to RAND how individual gun laws are estimated to change firearm homicide rates in Ohio. So things like, we have permitless carry in Ohio. If we were to repeal that, we'd see a decrease of about 7% estimated in firearm homicides. And if we enacted all 6 of these laws, according to experts, firearm homicides would decline by an estimated 43% in Ohio. Even if that number is like wildly optimistic, even if you said it was 20%, right, I would say it's worth enacting those 6 laws. And I also want to note, these kinds of laws have wide public support among gun and non-gun owners, especially when you talk about things like minimum age requirements, waiting periods, background checks, right? Those tend to have a lot of support even among gun owners. And so that's why we call them gun sense laws, right? They make sense to a wide array of people. I do really, yeah, that was my last slide. Okay, I do really want to express my deepest gratitude to all the people and groups involved, especially Malcolm, MONSE, Moms Demand Action, the Community Action Table. I was really thankful to be a part of this, and so I'm so thankful that Malcolm has been able to involve me in a lot of different things over the past 18 months or so. This is a picture of one of our Community Action Table meetings. You can't see me because I'm tiny, but I am like way over on the other side of the room, and that's Malcolm leading the meeting. And again, this is the QR code if you want to donate to that Healing and Compassion Fund for survivors, or if you want to apply to the fund. And I think we have the QR code here also for providing feedback. Is that right, for XCS? And my email address is there as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Megan, for a thought-provoking talk. We welcome your comments and your questions, right? This is a space for dialogue. So, anyone would like to?
I'm Amanda Winter, U.S. Pretrial Services Information Office, and I was interested in coming because I saw the article about the $2 million grant and how what will be done about the further research that will be done. And that's why I came to the talk. I was really interested because I think when you see the people that get arrested for gun crimes, we interview them, we meet their families, we go into their homes, we supervise them, we have to report before they go to prison, we supervise them when they come home. You just see things over and over and over again, and it's exhausting, and you just want to help make some change. So I'm just interested in learning about like, what we're going to do, or what's going to happen with the grant, and what's your initiative, what programs you're thinking of, and how maybe U.S. probation or federal agencies can get more involved and maybe be a partner.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk to you more about that. In terms of the grant, again, that just started. That was awarded to the city of Toledo. So myself and some colleagues at BGSU, as well as I think at Boston University, are consultants on the award. But that really involves things like sort of mapping the ecosystem. So who's doing the work in Toledo? Like what resources do we have that already exist? What resources do we maybe need to put in place? Like where are the gaps? Also providing some micro grants to community-based organizations as needed. also connecting with other sites and sort of networks of like other cities, other groups that are doing this work to sort of see is there things that we can learn and apply to Toledo. Are there things that would be beneficial here? And then setting up that capacity building and training academy to kind of provide support and capacity for those people, again, in the community doing that work. It's still early days, like very early days, so I don't have a lot in terms of like, oh yeah, this is what we're gonna do or this is what we know so far, but I would love to connect with you, and get some of your insights and talk about working together in the future. That'd be great.
Other questions, comments?
I'm sorry, you know everybody knows. Hi, my name is Shani Kimber. I'm one of the co-founders for Sisters for Unity. So what I wanted to say is, I agree that we need to start looking on the inside instead of the outside. Like the prisons, youth detention and things like that. Because the guys that are in there, they have a big influence on the guys that's out here. So I honestly think that if we go in there and talk to them and change their minds, that they will potentially, change the minds of the ones that's out here. I'm currently working with someone, he's in prison here in Toledo. He's in the maximum security. And his mindset, he did shootouts, he did all types of stuff. But I've been pouring into him and, giving him different revenues, what you can do, and just talking to him. Some of the ones that's in, they just need someone to listen. It shows that love and that support. And it can change a lot. Some people may think like, nah, it really can change because his mindset has went from here to, he's coming down. We're talking about trucking programs, they're telling him, any program they offer that's inside of the prison, please get it. So he's been doing different things, I communicate with them through, is it JPay or something?
Okay.
We talk like that, but I honestly think that if we get a group that can go in and start talking to them, because they can change the mindsets of out. We have a group that's out, that's talking, and so that can go in. So I honestly think that we needed to wrap around service. We can't just talk to the good ones. We have to talk to the bad ones and see where their mindset, like what made you do what you did. So that's why. Thank you.
Yeah, I really thank you for that because, again, that was one that came up consistently. Like, why aren't we talking to these people? Why aren't we going into detention, into jail, and prison, talking to these people? And what I also didn't mention, I mentioned, conflicts sort of happen in and out of social media and sort of, contagious into real life. What also came up is that's true for like detentions, jail centers, prisons, right? So conflicts might start on the outside, people might end up incarcerated, and then things they can get involved in a gang there, conflicts can happen in the jail or detention center, and so, we do need to remember that, I'm talking about community violence, but it's not always just the community, right? We have to engage these other populations and these other places where people are. And as part of the Violence Reduction Council, we did talk about this because one of the cases was someone who was released and again, they knew they had a target on their back and was killed not long after release. And so what came out of that conversation was that we do need this better wraparound services. We do need better when it comes to reentry services. We need to make sure we don't just say, okay, now you're out in the community, that's it, we're wiping our hands of you. We need to make sure we're staying connected with those people, making sure that they have the resources that they need. And then, like you said, depending on the person, if we can support them and get them to change, you can see this huge ripple effect in the community potentially. And so you haven't just changed that one person, now you've had this, really outsized effect on other people. So I would love to talk with you at another point too about the work that you're doing, because that's incredible. Yeah.
Other questions, comments?
Hey everyone, my name is Mia. I'm a student at BG. This is my professor. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about severe mental illness. I mean, it resonates a lot. I work in a forensic hospital, and so a lot of folks have been in and out of jail. They get there, sitting down with me, the intern, doing therapy is the first time. I'll ask, who have you talked to about this before? And it's no one. So they've been in and out of this over and over again. And the third year grad student intern is the first person they've talked to about some of their experiences. So I strongly echo what you're saying. But yeah, I was wondering if you could talk about like how much severe mental illness is part of this, initiatives that are happening to try and change how we respond to severe mental illness, like whether there's early intervention, like or early onset of psychotic symptoms, like just in general, what's going on that side?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I haven't seen as much come up with severe mental illness. And I think, I don't want to say that that's not a factor because it is, right? Unfortunately, sometimes people do have psychosis, a form of severe mental illness. But I think sometimes in the community there can be a misconception that like, this is what drives people to gun violence, right? They're severely mentally ill, when that's not necessarily always the case, right? So there are plenty of, right, severely mentally ill people who are not committing homicide or firearm injury. And so that is a factor. I don't know that that came up a lot. What comes up a lot is trauma, as you can imagine. So trauma-informed care. I think I neglected to mention about Rewire CBT. So I think the violence interruption team, the Save Our Community team, has been trained in Rewire CBT through ROCA, which is a way of interacting with youth and families that have been impacted to sort of help them, heal and work through this ongoing trauma, these cycles of trauma that they're experiencing. So that's come up pretty regularly. Substance abuse has come up, maybe not as consistently, but that also comes up as a factor in some of these cases. But I really haven't heard as much when it comes to severe mental illness, if I'm honest. And again, could also be my own personal ignorance, just something I didn't hear. Yeah.
I think it's, and I agree with you about like the risk with stereotypes and stuff. It's just, I know that on the forensic side, like if you're at a hospital.
Yeah, I think the possibility is that, again, if you're more used to just like media stories and how they focus on mass shootings and school shootings, and usually the story is someone with mental illness, right? Like there's a consistent story that they usually kind of tell with those incidents. But again, I don't think those are reflective of, it was one of, I don't know if it was one of the No More Silence podcasts, but I heard a metaphor that gun violence in general is like the ocean, and when we talk about like mass shootings and school shootings, it's like the shoreline. It's like what you can see, right? It's like the tip of the iceberg peeking up, when really there's all this other violence that's happening that's maybe not getting as much attention. And so yeah, again, I think severe mental illness plays a factor. How much of the time, how often, I don't know that I'm educated enough to say on that, but yeah, that's basically it.
I have a question. You mentioned that social media seem to play a role in why people resort to gun violence. So I wonder what exactly, if you already looked into that, is going on social media. And I was also wondering, and I know you said those are your next steps, so you may tell me, well, I don't know yet, if there is a specific connection to suicide, and if the young people out there committing suicide are somehow traveled by social media, or maybe there is no connection. I don't know, some things that occurred to me while listening to you.
Yeah, for your second point, I don't know if I know that specifically, but my guess is that it probably does play a role. Just like when we say media violence causes violence, we don't mean every person who's ever played a violent video game is going to go kill someone, right? Like that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about it's like one factor in a set of factors. I would imagine it's similar for social media and suicide, where people are differentially susceptible to the influence of social media, compulsive internet use, things like that. And so I would imagine it's a factor, at least for some people, in terms of suicide. And yeah, a lot of this was just doing this kind of work. I've been really educated. It's things that I wouldn't have known otherwise. But people getting into conflicts on like YouTube, posting videos, a music video, calling someone out. Apparently a lot of that happens, and then it kind of sort of spills over into, well, you called me out on YouTube, so now I'm going to show up at your door, or I'm going to find you in the street. And it seems like that's happening relatively commonly, according to the people that are talking in these meetings about it. But, yeah. So I'm not a social media expert either. That's something that I'd like to delve into more going ahead in the future, but yeah, I haven't done as much work on it so far.
Any other questions or comments?
went to the Black Issues Conference when you presented, so I was like, I recognize you.
My name is Heather Cleary, and I teach social work at the University of Toledo, and I'm an alum of BGSU. I have a PhD in American Cultural Studies, so it's been a while when I've gotten to go to these, so it was nice to see it and be able to come. I do things with Jewish writers and their empowerment, and so it's just great to hear, I think, the full picture. I feel like I'm sort of out of the adult side of this as much, so it's nice to see or learn more about the impact that the interrupters have had on the city. But yeah, we need to talk about it.
Yeah, I would love to connect with you. When I, obviously, like, Bryson has come to meetings and I've like heard stuff, but to go to the Black Issues Conference and really see you all present and like hear about the impact that it had on people, like, I just think it's incredible. I've listened to like all the podcast episodes. I love it. So I'd love to hear. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh,
Yeah.
of course.
So, like you just said that you went and listened to the things that they do, so on and so forth, with Save Our Community. Also, I've seen, the stuff that they do. But how do we get that information out to the public and to the community? Because I notice every time something happens, the community is just bashing them, bashing Malcolm, bashing the city. No, it's like, what are they doing? What are they doing? No one actually really knows what they do. You get what I'm saying? So how does that information get presented to the community to get community support?
That is such a great question. And I really think gun violence is one of those problems where any number above 0 is a tragedy, right? Every time we lose someone, every time someone is injured, it's a tragedy. But it's hard to say, like, without Monty and Save Our Community, that number would likely be much greater, right? So even though this is still a tragedy, it's a success. Malcolm always says, like, it doesn't feel like a success because we've lost people, but the truth is that they are likely saving lives. Again, with that trauma-informed work, they're helping those networks. I don't know that I know the answer to your question, but one thing I can say is when I went to City Council to provide public comment, a couple of mothers got up and basically told their stories, their heart-wrenching, traumatic stories about the things that they've experienced and how the Save Our Community team was there to really support them, show up to funerals, show up to court, like the things that they have been able to do for those people. And so even as someone who's been like coming to the community action table and like was aware of the work that they did, it still hit me like, oh my God, we need these people. We need to support this program. We need to make sure it continues. And that's not to say like, let's put it on the moms that they have to now like pour their heart out to everyone. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that there definitely has to be a way. We have to figure out a way to get that out to the community. I don't know if Malcolm's like thought through different ideas. I don't know if you have different ideas, but I think we should definitely workshop something because I think there's a lot of good work that's being done that people do need to know about. Yeah.
I agree with you on that, and Malcolm and I talked about it too, because this is a community issue. Just because that map shows there might be some parts of town where there isn't a blue dot or whatever the color of the dot is, it's a community issue. And I'm frustrated that some doors that I felt like should be opened quickly for Malcolm to come in and talk about what we're doing and tell some of those stories. They're like, oh, we don't want to talk about guns, or we don't want to talk about losing gun rights. I mean, it's like, this isn't what we're talking about. We're talking about human beings that are losing their lives because of a bunch of factors that we need to be addressing. So I don't know what the answer is either, but I feel like we need a committee within all this that really focuses in how to get that word through the entire, not even Toledo, but the county and beyond, because it impacts all of us.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it has to be out there. We just have to figure out what that method is. Yeah, did you have a thought on that?
I think Malcolm and Josh, they're doing so much of the work that needs to be done, and they don't have the resources to do all the other things, right? So, I mean, you're talking about universities like being a steward for this word, and I think, where there are resources for getting the word out, that they should be, doing some of that as well, because it can't be all on SOC. It's just what needs to happen is so ginormous that it can't be, because it's true. I think that group will continually be scapegoated for every little thing, and being given the resources to have this giant impact that I think people would love to see happen.
I'm curious too, is there, some of the conversations I've been a part of where I ask, who's gonna be in the room, and they're like, well, we don't really wanna talk about the names because that could also put a target on people. Is there some sort of balance between confidentiality too of some of the interventions that are happening to make sure that they don't become targeted, or is that part of it? I'm just naive to it. Is that part of maybe one of the struggles to getting the word out of the good work that's happening, or is that separate?
I mean, I think that's part of it. I think the members of Save Our Community are sort of known, like people know who they are. When it comes to other things like who's on violence reduction, like things like that, I think they do tend to be more secretive. When I noted that there were barriers to doing this project, that's a huge one. You go to someone and say, hey, I want to talk about gun violence. Can you talk to me about, let's sit down and have a conversation about gun violence. Doors shut, right? No one wants to talk about it. It's a problem that we don't want to have, and yet we still, we just don't want to address it as a community, as a group. And so, yeah, did you have a thought on that, Nicole?
Well, so yeah, my role in administration is a little bit different. Often I'm working in the community development, economic development space, right? And so there is a lot of community image concern, and I think that there is a space where we don't like to talk about our blemishes, right, as a community, and so we have to find this balance between how do we promote the really wonderful things about our community, because we have a lot of really wonderful things about our community, and also talk about the things that we need to work on collectively in a constructive fashion. And so I think we haven't found that balance yet, and I think there are some people in our community who have not come to terms with the fact that if we don't talk about the things that we need to work on in a constructive fashion and talk about the good work that we're doing, that organizations like yours and organizations like MONSE are doing collectively as a community organization, as a government organization, the research that Dr. Docherty is doing, right, at BGSU, and the work that great people at UT are doing as well, to really sort of strengthen our community. If we don't talk about that constructive partnership and that work that we're doing, we also are doing ourselves a disservice, because that is also part of what makes our community strong, right? So we just have to put it in the right tone and in the right context, and so we're just learning how to do that messaging, and I think that we have some folks in our community who are just not comfortable with that yet, and so there's been some resistance to that historically, and we need to figure out how to do that better.
Yeah, there's also going to be some people that you just think that they're never going to be happy, right? They're always going to be.
And so we just have to do it.
Yeah.
So we just have to do it and accept that some folks are going to be uncomfortable with it.
Yeah.
So, I'll explain what I talked to. So I think that we should have pamphlets about what we do. It don't have to be a long pamphlet. It could be a short pamphlet with the QR code on it. And we could call BGSU and say, hey, can we bring our pamphlets there?
Yeah.
And we put them out. We could call ProMedica. Can we bring our pamphlets there? Take them to the different places to where WIC and things like that. Can we call Tartar? Hey, can we put our little pamphlet in the Tartar bus? Ask the library, can we stick it up? I think we have to start somewhere. And I think by doing that, you can get the word out.
Yeah.
And I honestly think that we call this the school systems. Can we bring our pamphlets in the school and pass them out? Can we do? We have to start somewhere, because us just coming to the MONSE and talking about all the good people. These are good people in here. We gotta get to the other people. So I think we have to start somewhere. We have to start, calling. Can we do this? So we have to get a small pamphlet together and just go out and here you go, trick or treat. So, yeah.
I think there was a question here.
No, yeah, my name's Erin Kramer. I've been one of the local leads for Moms Demand Action since 2017, and I like what you said about the word not getting out, because you were right. We've been trying to get the word out about what Moms Demand Action is doing, but then also, we've been working with lots of other organizations, Sisters for Unity, Mothers of, I think it's Parents of Murdered Children. Thank you. It used to be Mothers, yes. Parents of Murdered Children, the Multi-Faith Coalition Against Gun Violence. There's so many organizations that it's just really hard to get the word out. So I'm now running for Toledo City Council. So that's why I have a name tag on. I know everybody's why is she wearing a name tag? But I'm trying to work with the mayor on doing things, because you know, there are wonderful things that are happening, but there's a lot more we can do locally. And I look at like what Cincinnati has been able to do, and with the confines of the laws in Ohio, because Dr. Docherty put the listing of things that would really move the needle on gun violence, but all of those things are controlled by our legislators in Columbus, and they are not willing to do any of those things. So what can we do here as a city? So that is kind of where I want to be. But I guess what I was trying to get at though was the good things are not what are gonna be on the nightly news, and that is really horrible. But you know, I turn on the news every morning to kind of see what happened, and what do they lead with? The gun violence, and that, you know, is really unfortunate. And how do we get the good things that are happening to be front and center on the news? And so.
Yeah, I also think like if a lot of the conflicts start on social media, probably a lot of the like supports and interventions likely need to have some sort of component of social media. It seems like there's some sort of like, you know, there's all these youth who want to like have their voice heard and are looking for more empowerment, and who are also really good at social media. And then there's people like me who are like hermits who don't use it at all. And it seems like there somehow could be a great opportunity there for collaboration and for using those networks to get information around. I just have no idea what it would look like. Yeah, I think it would be a lot of sort of messy trial and error to figure out what works. But yeah, I still support the pamphlet, trick or treat for everyone.
Yeah.
100%.
Just in response to that last comment, I know one of our working groups at the Community Action Table was social media. I think Bryson was one of the Save Our Community individuals was on that. He's relatively younger, you know, not a student anymore, but relatively more like in touch with what's going on in students in schools. And I thought he came up with some incredible, like, you know, we can't just pretend it's not happening. We can't just take away the phones. We can't just take away the social media, right? Like sometimes as adults, it's like, well, let's just take away TikTok. Let's just, you know, take their phones away at school. And it's just not realistic or helpful. And so he was talking about how, again, we need to be a little bit more like innovative, think outside the box, whether it's, you know, again, these youth know, these young people know social media way better than I do. And so for me to try and tell them, like, here's what you need to do, it's just not gonna work. But if we can talk authentically and genuinely with people and try to get, you know, gauge what would help, what are they interested in doing, I think hopefully there's opportunity for growth there. Yeah.
So I think this is sort of a secret, a well-kept secret. I think in part for the reasons we're talking about, like, so this will be the second year that they're doing a youth summit to prevent gun violence, and this year the topic is social media. So we're hoping that the kids will come up with some really cool ideas that are outside of the box that might be helpful. But they're also at Bryson is gonna have them do some things around algorithms, understanding. So some of it is also just media literacy or social media literacy, but learning about their algorithms and how they sort of create particular things that they're seeing and how they can shift and change that. So he's created like a game for them to play around with their algorithms. So yeah, it'll be fun to see what they come up with.
Is that something that community members can come and just observe, or is it more of a?
So that would be up to Josh, but it's very possible. We've invited some groups of students from UT that are coming to sort of be adults in the room, but they've sort of limited the number of adults. But they might be open to BGSU students coming, and you know, just being there to learn and to also support. I know he's always trying to get me to have fewer and fewer adults, but I mean, our students need to learn about this stuff too, and so I think it's a good way for young people to learn from each other. But
How
so.
do you pick the students?
The students are actually from the schools where there are violence interrupters. So those schools, and then there's 2 schools that have been actively doing gun violence prevention. So Rogers and Early College. So those students who've been doing advocacy are also invited. And I know Malcolm wants it to be citywide at some point, but we've had really limited resources. So.
So why don't you reach out to some of the youth group homes? Cause I work for a mental health agency and I know a lot of group homes that have young men in them. So that's what I'm saying, we have to get those ones. The good ones, no, we gotta get those,
Yeah.
no, we have to get them.
So we need to get grant money to pay for the youth summit so that we can have big and have all those.
Yeah, so that'd be a good thing to have
Yeah.
somebody to, look up, group homes in the
Yeah.
city of Toledo. I know I could, a whole lot, I know
Yeah,
a lot
yeah.
of it, and so
When we
we
talk,
could do
see,
that.
that's another thing that bothers me when we say we need grant money and stuff like that, because I'm sure that all these organizations together got the resources to do it. Cause it doesn't cost a lot. I've seen, forums where they done paid a speaker $25,000, but you don't invest $1,000 in getting the kids here with advertising. Make it make sense. It's not a lot that it takes to do that. You get what I'm saying? The hardest part is to get the kids. You know what I mean? I think everything else can pay for itself because it's not a lot. It's just data collection. It's just listening and trying to understand. Basically, you know what I mean? It doesn't take a lot of money, and I hear that so much. We need grants. We need, even with the pamphlets, all these organizations. You know what I mean? I've been paid thousands of dollars to have kids buried for my organization. I've given thousands of dollars to just people, right? So if all of our organizations come together and say, look, let's put together a pamphlet, right? So we got in that pamphlet, we got the resources, we got what you can call if you're feeling suicidal, we got all these resources in the back, and we're promoting each organization, what we do, what we consist of, a small little paragraph. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And we all can do that together. You're 1,000, you're 1,000, you're 1,000, you're 1,000. We don't need a grant for that. If we can't invest within ourselves, then I mean, like, really, are we really in this work for the right reason? And a lot of people don't do the work unless they got a grant, unless they got money behind it, and it doesn't always take that because I don't hardly get anything, like anything, and anything I've ever got from a grant, I gave back. I give back 1,000. They might give me $7,500, but I'll pay for 1,000 book bags with school supplies. I had over 18,000 invested. Had to pull up a U-Haul truck to bring all those book bags to the park. So did the $7,500? Yeah, it was a help, but I still invested my own time, my own money, my own resources, and that's what we have to start doing instead of being dependent on other resources. You know what I mean? Because I'm sure all these organizations got something somewhere, and if worse come to worse, we can ask them for donations from the community. Get the community involved. And let them see where their dollar's going. Let them be a part of the process so they can see it. We won't have to promote it. Let's bring them along. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think that can work because they always feel left out of conversations, left out of everything, especially the kids. You know what I mean? I talk to kids all the time. It's like, main thing they talk about is jobs and, the social media thing. Like, okay, cool, but it's like, it's the ego. You know, when they're on social media, it's like nobody wants to be a punk. Nobody wants to seem soft. So those little comments that people make, but we see them on celebrity stats all the time. We talk about celebrities like crazy, but the kids can't take it. They don't understand like it's just a troll or whatever they call them. You know what I mean? They take all that stuff to heart because they're more emotional.
Yeah.
So now when we get to talking about that, we need to introduce social emotional learning to these kids. When we talk about trauma, Woodward, they wouldn't even let us come in and talk to the kids. They've lost, 5 or 6 kids in the past year. So when they look around, they see those empty seats of those kids that they've been going to school with for the past 4 or 5 years. They're gone. You think that ain't traumatic that they come in there every day and see those empty seats? Now you got kids who ain't thought about a game, ain't thought about violence or none of that, wanting to carry a gun because they want to feel safe. They don't want that to happen to them. They don't want their seat to be empty. There needs to be something in place to deal with that trauma. This thing is so multifaceted. There's so many angles. It's like we're all against gun violence, so we're the body of the octopus. But each one of those tentacles serves a purpose. We can't lift this chair with one tentacle, so it's gonna take 2, and the other 2 are gonna keep us grounded, and the other 2 can keep fighting off whatever they need to fight off. You see what I'm saying? But our organizations as a whole need to work together more to make all of these things happen is my point. There's no need to, oh, they give us any money. And that just be the end of it, you know?
Well, you know, one of the things that I was hoping would come out of the action plan was the ability to find all these organizations. Because that's one of the things I've learned sitting at the community tables, is there are so many people out there doing grassroots things that have huge impacts. And I feel like we're doing a lot. We just gotta find ourselves and meet each other and take on what you're describing. And that to me is a huge challenge, is just finding all these groups. They just surface kind of randomly, but they're so quiet and low-key in churches and neighborhoods all over the community.
I know that Resource Hub was one thing that we talked, but I haven't
Right.
heard anything about that in a while.
The
Is that
Resource
still-
Hub is coming up.
Okay.
You know, this is gonna be like a computer-generated thing, but it's gonna be tied in with United Way and that, what is it, 211. But I still feel like that's gonna be helpful, but the groups that are doing all these things, like you just described what you're doing, the rest of us need to know how to bring that together and pull those funds and pull that knowledge and pull those things. Because I think it's there. I really do believe there's a lot more in this community than we give credit to, but it's hard to find.
Yeah, there's a team pages, it's an app that, the Human Trafficking, and the Human Trafficking Institute at UT put together. So like, we see people recreating the wheel for teens all the time. And that was created by young people, like it was youth led. But I think the thing is that there are people like us who are throwing all of ourselves into those things. And when you do that, there's not a lot of room to like do the connecting. And like all my free hours are spent with young people. You know, I don't have time to come do things like this. And I agree with you. Like, how do you get folks that are working very hard together without making it more work for them to come together?
I understand that part of it.
So that's kind of a plug for our grant that we're working on. So with BGSU, Monty, we're going to be doing an ecosystem analysis. And so part of my job actually is to get together or to get interviews with folks and organizations just to see what's happening, how you work, all of that stuff. I hope it's okay that I brought that up right now. I have my card here, if it's okay if I pass it around, if you would email me just to make sure we have you on our list. We have a great list started from the Monty group and Dr. Docherty, but I want to make sure that we have everybody and where you can sort of, get all of your perspectives and so that we can create that ecosystem. And that's sort of the first part of the overall grant that we're doing, where we're going to be hopefully then doing these micro grants, where we'll be doing the trainings and trying to see what that looks like, what the ecosystem looks like in Toledo, get it all in one place hopefully. So I'm going to pass that around if that's okay.
If I may say something, I am amazed by the discussion that's going on. That's so powerful.
It really demonstrates, like I was trying to say, we're resourceful, we're resilient, and then you all like did it in, in real time.
And I think that's the purpose also of us having, when I say us, I mean ICS, trying to support the type of research that you do, which is with and for the community, and then to bring out the ideas, the questions, again, back to the community and hosting this not on campus. I know it makes it difficult if you are a student at Bowling Green to come here, some students don't have cars, but we think it's important to take this conversation out to the community. And I know this is a small step, but I am very grateful for all your comments and contributions. And I hope if some of you didn't know each other before of this is an opportunity for you to get in touch and start doing things you are talking about. I would like to give you the time to say any final words that you may, and then I would suggest we could close the event, but you can keep working together and trying to actually address gun violence and reduce gun violence in our community.
I really don't have anything else to share except kind of similar to you. Like I will, Malcolm talks to us sometimes about like, oh, I got to make sure you get paid for the grant. Like, you you know, certain work is like, I don't need to get paid for showing up to a meeting and talking about like how we can prevent gun violence, right? Like, I'll come to the community action table, I'll come to the suicide coalition, like, I'll go to whatever meeting, come do these talk, like, whatever I can. I feel limited sometimes because I'm not a clinician, I'm not a grassroots organizer, like, I'm not doing that kind of hands-on work. And so sometimes I struggle with like, am I actually, you know, doing anything worthwhile? But all I'll say is like, to the extent that I can help anyone do anything, make a difference, please connect with me because I really, hopefully it came across, but this is something I personally care a lot about and really want to continue working on and hopefully help some people. So, and thank you all again for being here. I really appreciate it.
If I may say something to
Yep.
you, we gotta understand that the car, right? I'd like to use examples so people could, because I'm not articulate as other people, so I like to use examples. But we have